I remember the taste of hunger. Not the kind you feel when dinner is late, but the kind that lives in your bones. The kind that wakes you up at night, whispering that tomorrow might not be any better than today. I was 7 years old the first time I understood we were poor. Really poor. The kind of poor that meant my mother cried when she thought I was sleeping. The kind that meant my father worked 18-hour days in the coal mines and still couldn't afford to fix the hole in our roof. We lived in Katowice, a gray city in southern Poland, where the air always smelled like smoke and the sky never seemed to remember it was supposed to be blue. My name is Piotr Kowalski, and this is my story. The summer I turned 8, something happened that changed everything. It was July, hot and sticky, the kind of day when every kid in the neighborhood scraped together whatever coins they could find for ice cream. I had 12 zloty in my pocket. 12 zloty I'd earned running errands for old Mrs. Nowak down the street. My friends were already at the corner store. I could hear them laughing, arguing over whether chocolate or strawberry was better. I started walking toward them. But then I passed the second-hand bookshop. You know the kind, dusty windows, books stacked in crooked towers, that smell of old paper and possibility. There was a book in the window. It had a torn cover and yellowed pages, but the title caught my eye. How Money Works, a Guide for Young Minds. I stood there, frozen, my 12 zloty burning a hole in my pocket. The ice cream would last 5 minutes. The book would last forever. I walked into the shop. That book changed my life. I read it 17 times that summer. I read it until the pages started falling out, until I had to tape the spine back together, until I could recite whole chapters from memory. It wasn't a complicated book. It talked about saving, about investing, about how money could work for you instead of the other way around. Simple concepts, revolutionary concepts, for a boy who had never imagined that poverty wasn't a life sentence. My friends thought I was crazy. Piotr, come play football with us. Piotr, we're going to the river. Piotr, why do you always have your nose in a book? I couldn't explain it to them. I couldn't explain the fire that had ignited in my chest, the burning certainty that there had to be more than this gray city and these gray skies and this gray life stretching out before me. So I just smiled and kept reading. By the time I was 12, I had a system. Every zloty that came my way got divided into 3 parts. 1 part for my mother, to help with groceries. 1 part for savings, hidden in a coffee tin under my bed. 1 part for books. Always books. I read everything I could get my hands on. Business books, history books, biographies of people who had started with nothing and built empires. I read about Andrew Carnegie, who came to America as a poor Scottish immigrant and became one of the richest men in the world. I read about Aristotle Onassis, who started with $60 in his pocket and ended up owning a shipping empire. I read about Jan Kulczyk, Poland's first billionaire, who built his fortune through determination and strategic thinking. These men became my teachers. Their words became my roadmap. And slowly, painfully, I began to see a path forward. But then, everything fell apart. I was 14 when my father came home from the mine coughing blood. Black lung, the doctors said. Years of breathing coal dust had turned his lungs into something that barely functioned. He couldn't work anymore. My mother took a job cleaning houses, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. I remember the night she sat me down at our tiny kitchen table, her hands shaking, her eyes red from crying. Piotr, I need you to quit school. We need you to work. The words hit me like a physical blow. Quit school. Give up everything I'd been working toward. Become another boy from Katowice who never escaped the gravity of poverty. I looked at my mother, at the lines on her face that hadn't been there a year ago, at the way her shoulders slumped under the weight of everything. And I made a decision. Give me 1 week, I said. Just 1 week. I didn't sleep for 7 days. I went to every shop in the neighborhood, every factory, every business I could find. I offered to work before school, after school, weekends, holidays. I would do anything, carry anything, clean anything. Just please, please, let me keep going to school. Most of them laughed at me. A skinny 14-year-old with patched clothes and desperate eyes? What could I possibly offer? But on the 6th day, I walked into a small printing shop on the outskirts of town. The owner was a man named Stanislav, gruff, weathered, with ink-stained fingers and a perpetual scowl. What do you want, boy? A job, sir. I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired. I'll come early and stay late. I'll learn everything you're willing to teach me. He studied me for a long moment. Why should I hire you? I reached into my bag and pulled out a notebook. It was filled with my handwriting, pages and pages of business ideas I'd been developing, ways the printing shop could expand, new markets they could target, efficiencies they could implement. I'd spent weeks researching, weeks preparing for exactly this moment. Stanislav took the notebook. He flipped through it slowly, his scowl deepening, and then something shifted in his eyes. You wrote all this? Yes, sir. You're 14. Yes, sir. He was quiet for a long time. Then he laughed. A deep, rumbling laugh that shook his whole body. You've got more business sense than men twice your age, he said. Start tomorrow. For in the morning. Don't be late. I wasn't late. Not once. Not ever. The years that followed were the hardest of my life. I worked at the printing shop from 4 in the morning until 7, then went to school, then came back and worked until 9 at night. I slept 4 hours a night, sometimes less. My body ached constantly. My eyes burned from exhaustion. My hands were always covered in cuts and ink stains. But I never stopped reading. I never stopped learning. I never stopped saving. Every extra zloty went into my coffee tin. When my classmates went to parties, I worked. When they went on dates, I read. When they talked about their dreams, I built plans. They called me obsessed. They called me boring. They called me crazy. Maybe they were right. But I had seen what poverty did to my father, how it broke his body and crushed his spirit. I had seen what it did to my mother, how it aged her decades in just a few years. I would not let it do the same to me. When I was 17, Stanislav called me into his office. His face was grave, and for a terrible moment, I thought he was going to fire me. Piotr, I'm dying. The words didn't register at first. Cancer, he continued. The doctors say I have 6 months, maybe less. I couldn't speak. This man, this gruff, demanding, secretly kind man, had become like a second father to me. And now he was dying. I have no children, Stanislav said. No family to speak of. And I've been thinking about what happens to this shop when I'm gone. He reached into his desk and pulled out a stack of papers. I want you to buy it. I stared at him. Sir, I can't afford. I know what you have saved. He smiled, the first real smile I'd ever seen from him. You think I didn't notice you counting your coins when you thought no one was looking? I know exactly how much is in that coffee tin of yours. He pushed the papers toward me. I'm offering you the shop for exactly that amount. Not a zloty more. My hands were shaking. Why? Because you remind me of myself 60 years ago. Because you work harder than anyone I've ever met. Because, his voice cracked. Because you're the son I never had, Piotr. And I want to know that everything I built, everything I worked for, is in good hands. I signed the papers that day. I was 17 years old, and I owned a business. Stanislav died 3 months later. I held his hand in the hospital room. This man who had given me a chance when no one else would, and I made him a promise. I'll make you proud, sir. I'll build something you would have been proud of. He squeezed my hand. One final squeeze, and then he was gone. I threw myself into the business. I expanded the printing shop, invested in new equipment, found new clients. Within 2 years, I had tripled our revenue. Within 5 years, I owned 3 printing shops. But I wasn't satisfied. I could see opportunities everywhere. Opportunities that Poland's emerging market economy was just beginning to create. The year was 1989. Communism was collapsing. Everything was changing. And I was ready. I took my profits and invested in real estate. Everyone thought I was insane. The economy is unstable, Piotr. You'll lose everything. Play it safe. But I had read enough history to know that fortunes are made in times of chaos. When everyone else is running away, that's when you run toward. I bought buildings, warehouses, land that no one else wanted. I renovated. I developed. I waited. And when Poland's economy stabilized, when foreign investment started pouring in, when everyone suddenly realized that this country was going to be the success story of Eastern Europe, I was sitting on a gold mine. The next 2 decades were a blur of expansion. Real estate led to construction. Construction led to manufacturing. Manufacturing led to technology. Each success funded the next venture. Each risk opened new doors. I made mistakes. God, I made so many mistakes. I trusted the wrong partners, invested in the wrong projects, nearly lost everything at least 3 times. But I never stopped. I never gave up. I never forgot that skinny boy with 12 zloty in his pocket, standing outside a bookshop, making the choice that would define his entire life. By the time I was 45, I was worth $3 billion. $3 billion. The number still doesn't feel real to me. I had homes in London, New York, Singapore. I had yachts and private planes and everything a person could possibly want. And I was miserable. Not unhappy, exactly. Just empty. I would wake up in my penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, and I would think about Katowice, about the gray skies and the cold dust and the hole in our roof, about my father coughing blood into a handkerchief, about my mother crying in the kitchen when she thought I was asleep, about all the boys like me, still trapped in that poverty, still believing that their lives were already written. One morning, I looked in the mirror and asked myself a question. What are you doing with all of this, Piotr? The face in the mirror had no answer. The call came on a Tuesday. My mother, now 83 years old, still living in Katowice despite my pleas for her to move somewhere nicer. Piotr, I went to the old neighborhood today. Do you remember the Wisniewski family? From the apartment below us. I remembered. A family even poorer than ours. 5 children crammed into 2 rooms. Their grandson, Tomek, he's 14 now. Brilliant boy, top of his class. But his father just lost his job, and they're talking about pulling him out of school. My chest tightened. 14 years old, top of his class, about to lose everything. Mama, I'll call you back. I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long time. Then I called my assistant. Cancel all my meetings for the next month. I'm going to Poland. The flight to Krakow was the longest of my life. Not because of the distance, but because of what was waiting for me. For 30 years, I had run from Poland. Oh, I'd gone back for visits, for business, for my mother's birthday. But I had never really returned. I had never faced the boy I used to be. Now, looking out the airplane window at the clouds beneath me, I felt that boy stirring in my chest. Scared, hungry, desperate to prove that he was worth something. It's okay, I whispered to him. We're going home. Katowice had changed. And it hadn't. The gray buildings had been renovated, painted cheerful colors that seemed almost defiant against the industrial backdrop. New businesses had sprung up, cafes and tech startups and signs of prosperity that would have been unimaginable when I was young. But the poverty was still there, hidden in the outskirts, in the forgotten neighborhoods, in the faces of children who wore the same look I used to wear. The look of someone who has already accepted that life will never get better. I found Tomek Wisniewski on a Saturday afternoon. He was sitting on the steps of his apartment building, a worn textbook open on his lap, studying even though it was the weekend. Even though his father had just told him he would have to quit school on Monday. I sat down beside him. What are you reading? He looked up at me, suspicious, defensive. Mathematics. Not that it matters anymore. Why wouldn't it matter? Because I can't afford to stay in school. His voice was bitter, old beyond his years. My father says I need to work. So I'm going to work. End of story. I nodded slowly. How much would you need to stay in school? He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. More than you have, old man. Trust me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a business card. My name is Piotr Kowalski. I grew up in this neighborhood, in that building right over there. I pointed to the gray structure across the street. 40 years ago, I was sitting exactly where you're sitting now, reading exactly the same way you're reading now, feeling exactly the same despair you're feeling now. Tomek stared at me. You're that Piotr Kowalski? The billionaire. I'm a boy from Katowice who chose books over ice cream. I smiled. Everything else came after. I didn't just help Tomek. I couldn't. Once I started looking, I saw them everywhere. Brilliant children trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Talented young people with no opportunities to develop their gifts. Families making impossible choices between education and survival. I had spent 30 years building a fortune. Now it was time to spend it. The Kowalski Foundation launched 6 months later. We started with scholarships, full rides for any student who demonstrated exceptional ability and financial need. Then we added mentorship programs, connecting young people with successful professionals who could guide them. Then vocational training for those who wanted to start businesses of their own. Then microloans, small amounts of capital that could turn dreams into reality. Within 3 years, we had helped over 10,000 young people. Within 5 years, that number had grown to 50,000. Within a decade, we had changed the landscape of opportunity in Poland. But the work was never easy. There were failures, students who dropped out despite our support, businesses that collapsed despite our funding, young people who couldn't escape the gravity of their circumstances no matter how hard we tried to help them. Each failure felt like a personal wound. I would lie awake at night, wondering if I was doing enough, if I was doing it right, if all my money and good intentions were actually making a difference. One evening, after a particularly brutal day, I sat in my office in Warsaw and stared at the wall. A photograph hung there, one I'd had framed years ago. It showed a skinny boy with patched clothes and determined eyes, standing in front of a gray apartment building in Katowice. Me, at 14, the year everything almost ended. What do? I asked the boy in the photograph. How do I know if any of this matters? The boy didn't answer. But then, my phone buzzed. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Kowalski, this is Tomek Wisniewski. I just wanted you to know. I graduated from university today, first in my class. I start my new job at a tech company next week. None of this would have been possible without you. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." I sat there for a long time, reading those words over and over, letting them sink into my bones. This was why it mattered. I'm 53 years old now. I still wake up early, still read for at least 2 hours every day, still look for opportunities to learn and grow. Some habits never die. The foundation has become my life's work, my true legacy. Not the buildings I own or the businesses I've built or the zeros in my bank account, but the children I've helped, the futures I've unlocked, the cycles of poverty I've helped to break. Last month, I returned to Katowice for the groundbreaking of our newest project, a community center built on the same street where I grew up, designed to give young people a place to learn and dream and become whoever they want to be. The mayor gave a speech. Local dignitaries cut ribbons. Cameras flashed. But none of that mattered to me. What mattered was the group of children gathered at the edge of the crowd, watching with wide eyes, wondering what all the fuss was about. I walked over to them. "Do you know why we're building this place?" I asked. They shook their heads. Because 50 years ago, a boy from this neighborhood had a choice. He could buy ice cream, or he could buy a book. I knelt down so I was at their eye level. He chose the book, and that choice, that one small choice, changed everything. A little girl with bright eyes and tangled hair looked at me seriously. "What happened to the boy?" I smiled. "He's still learning, still growing, still trying to figure out what he wants to be when he grows up." She giggled. "But you're old." "I know." I laughed. "But here's a secret. You're never too old to become the person you were meant to be. And you're never too young to start." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a book. A small one, with a worn cover and yellowed pages. How Money Works, a guide for young minds. The same book I'd bought 60 years ago. The same book that had changed my life. Carefully preserved through all the years and all the changes. I handed it to the little girl. "This is for you. Read it. Learn from it. And then pass it on to someone else who needs it." She took the book with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," I said. "Thank you for reminding me why I do this." I walked away from the crowd, past the construction site, past the gray buildings that had once defined the boundaries of my world. I walked until I reached the corner where the second-hand bookshop used to be. It was a coffee shop now, bright and modern, filled with young people typing on laptops and dreaming their own dreams. I stood there for a moment, remembering the boy I used to be. Hungry, scared, standing outside this very window with 12 zloty in his pocket. "You did it," I whispered to him. "You actually did it." The boy didn't answer, but I felt him smile. The work continues. It will continue long after I'm gone. Because poverty isn't just about money. It's about belief. It's about possibility. It's about looking at your circumstances and deciding that they don't have to define your future. I was a poor boy from Katowice who chose books over ice cream. And that choice, that one small choice, became a fortune, became a foundation, became a legacy, became proof that where you start doesn't have to determine where you end. My name is Piotr Kowalski. I am 53 years old, and I am just getting started.